MashaAllah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam, Imam Rahman. How are you?
Walaikum
Alhamdulillah,
salam.
Alhamdulillah. How are you? How are you, Dr. Darren?
Alhamdulillah, Imam. Great to see you.
MashaAllah, it's good to see both of you. Barakallah fikum. Inshallah, we will get started right away. Um, we were just trying to quickly finish up with our Salat al-Maghrib. So, inshallah, um, Alhamdulillah, we are blessed to have our two distinguished um, members of the Greater Boston community, mashallah, Dr. Darren and Sheikh Dr. Imam Khalil Abdur Rashid. Both of you, Jazakallah khair, welcome to this program that we are putting together this evening. So, inshallah, we'll start with maybe a little recitation, hopefully, inshallah, with the barakah of the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the verses and the kalam Allah, the speech of God, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا واذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ كنتم أعداء فألف بين قلوبكم فأصبحتم بنعمته إخوانا وكنتم على شفا حفرة من النار فأنقذكم منها كذلك يبين الله لكم آياته لعلكم تهتدون يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم نحن على ذلك من الشاهدين الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. I want all of us to take a moment and gather our thoughts and all of um, our intellectual together and to think about what's going on around us in this past few days, that what we have seen, the oppression against the Black community. And we have seen a lot and heard a lot. And I think this is the time for us, and especially I'm speaking for my own self, this is a time for us to listen. And I really want to take this opportunity for myself to learn from our two distinguished guests tonight, and to learn and to listen and to understand. And therefore, without any further ado, I just want to quickly introduce both of our guests. MashaAllah, both of them are someone who are well known to our community. Um, we'll start, inshallah, with Dr. Darren. MashaAllah, he's one of our own community members, MashaAllah. He is the professor at Siemens University, and MashaAllah, one of his job and one of his expertise is educating educators and teaching teachers, inshallah. So hopefully that we can learn something, inshallah, tonight, and not just to learn and to take notes and to kind of also, inshallah, we'll have a Q&A towards the end, but I think it's something to take home as a practical solution for the difficulty and the crisis and the challenges that we see around us and that we are facing these days. So inshallah, without any further ado, Dr. Darren.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank y'all so much for this opportunity to speak in front of y'all. Once again, I think I say this all the time. Like I speak in front of people a lot. It's part of my job, but I always get nervous when I speak to this community, and that's just a sign of how much respect I have for this community. And what an honor it is to be speaking before Sheikh Khalil, who's I'm going to try and get through my part, as quickly as possible, because I know that Sheikh Khalil is going to really give us some really important insight. I've been listening to him talk over the last few weeks on these issues, and I just can't wait to get to hear what he has to say. So I'm just going to jump right in, and I think I'm going to try and utilize technology today a little bit. I actually made a PowerPoint. Just because I wanted to try and make it as clear as possible for myself and for folks moving forward. So hopefully this will work, okay? And bear with me. So here we go. Bismillah. All right, and let me see if I can just do this the right way. Sorry. 1 second. Here we go. Bismillah. So I hope y'all can see this. And so I've given many talks to this community before, okay? And it's always, like I said, a pleasure to give talks to this community. And I think the talks clearly have not been enough, okay? Right? And I say that out of love, right? Any of us who have been on the famous or somewhat infamous, WhatsApp list, group for our community, has seen testimonials, from Black members of our community, Black brothers and sisters, right, who have made it clear that there's still issues that we have to grapple with amongst ourselves in our own community, okay, right? And so that means that to the extent that we're serious about this work, it's going to take more than the semi-annual talks or khutbas from Dr. Darren to really actualize this work, okay? And I want to be clear. I know that this community has been really serious about doing this work as well, and I've seen it, right? I've seen it from the time I've been here. And we also know that our community has a really important. It's either we can see that as an opportunity and a test, right? Because we have such a unique thing going on in Sharon, because we really do have a really racially diverse group of folks who are a part of this community, and that's an opportunity and it's a test, right? Because that means that we have this real opportunity, because we always hear this, there's no racism in Islam, and I agree, but that doesn't mean that Muslims cannot be involved in racism, right? That it means that we just have an affirmative test to fight against it. It doesn't just mean that because there's no racism in Islam that we have nothing to deal with, right? It's like, does that make sense? And so we have work to do. And I will say a few things. I think when I've given talks before, these are the three big lessons that I usually have been giving when I've given talks about race and racism, in our previous halakas. Whose shoulders are we standing on is one big topic, and I'll come back to each of these. Our children are learning more by what they see than what they hear, right? And that racism needs intentionality to be disrupted, okay? And what I'm gonna try and do is walk us through those few things, and then give some real concrete just suggestions about how we can be moving forward with action to actualize the learning. And then we'll pass it off to Sheikh Khalil, who's going to really, make it, clear for us. So let me see if I can move us forward. Let's see, whose shoulders are we standing on, right? And so we have our as Muslims in America, right? Like the early vanguards of Islam, the early Muslims in our country were African Muslims who were enslaved, right, and brought to this country, right? And we have a picture here of Bilali Muhammadan, right, who was an enslaved man from Guinea who basically had a working knowledge of Arabic and memories of Islamic teachings, and did his very best, right, to hold on to these teachings and pass it on to the folks that he had under him. And this document, this Bilali document, actually, you can actually find it at the University of Georgia, and it's just an amazing. You have to understand that, like, Islam was not allowed to come over here in the United States. It was forcibly being taken away from folks, and anything that wasn't Christianity was being taken away. So this act of keeping, trying to keep this faith alive in the face of people who were actively trying to take away is a massive undertaking, right? And the notion that Islam is now here, no, it's now, we move forward hundreds of years and it's here. It's such a blessing from Allah, but it's on the backs, right, of folks who were trying to preserve that tradition under really dire conditions, right? And so we have to understand that Black Muslims, right, were in a lot of ways the first Muslims here in the United States, and so we're benefiting, yes, from the mercy of Allah and the work that these folks have done, and those shoulders that we're standing on. Okay, so that's just one way to think about it. In the Boston area, or in the United States in particular, for many, I know our community, I've talked about this before, our community, we have a lot of us are folks who immigrated here, right? And have a lot of opportunities, right? We're coming to the United States looking for opportunities, better schools, better jobs, right? Freedom, to worship the way we want to, right? That struggle has come on the back of many Black folks, right? Who fought for these rights, up until the point that then when many folks that are immigrating here could then take advantage of those rights, right? So those of us who moved, right? So then moving back to that last slide, for example, for those of us who moved to the United States because it's an economically prosperous nation, okay, right? It is, but where did that, how, right? Where did that prosperity come from? A cursory understanding of U.S. history helps you understand that it was on the back of African slaves, that, of all the cash crops that became the backbone, right, of the American economy, came from unpaid labor, right, on the backs of African folks. So for those of us who are just coming here because the United States is just a prosperous place, that came from somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. If those of us who came to Sharon, Massachusetts for the great school system, right, or a nice safe place to live, right? I've talked about this in previous clips, like, halakas, that Black folks were on the front lines of making sure that those spaces were available for folks to be able to live in, right, in the first place. I told the story of my step grandfather, my grandfather-in-law, who basically integrated the town of Schenectady, New York, but secretly, but because he had a white man buy the house for him, move in the darkness of the night, and then voila, now Schenectady's integrated, right? But it took sacrifice and hard work that a lot of us are now standing on to be able to move into suburban neighborhoods, to have safe places to live and great schools to go to, because as early as 40, 50 years ago, that just was not an option, right? Until many predominantly Black folks, took on that call. So we are these are other shoulders that we're standing on right now. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Another big topic that I talk about a lot when I do these clips is I'm also trained as a developmental psychologist, and I think a lot about how young folks learn, right? And to the extent that we're really leaning on young folks to be those agents of change for us, right? I've said this many times, young folks learn by what you do more than what you say. Okay, so we can do, and we know about this as a simple principle of our deen, right? There's what do the words that are coming off our tongues mean, right? If they're not backed up or they're not consonant with actions that reflect an understanding of those words, right? And so for young folks, even more so. So we can say all the right things, Black Lives Matter, this, that, whatever it is, treat people equally, don't judge people by the color, the color of their skin. We can say all those things, but if they see us doing contrary to that, and they see us doing that consistently in how we move through the world, that's going to be way more powerful, right? And so that really becomes an affirmative action for us to think about, not just saying things, but doing things, right? And so what do our young folks, what do all the folks around to see us doing in our family, in our everyday lives? How are we, which families do we socialize with? Which families are we allowing our children to think about getting married to? Which folks are they, socializing with on weekends or whatever, right? How are we organizing our weekend activities that might create opportunities for folks either to come together across difference or stay apart because of difference, right? What are they seeing in our communities, right? In our masajid, in our organizations? Who are the leaders? Who gets to say, who gets the, whose voices are heard, right? What kind of roles are people in? Does that make sense? They need to be seeing the ways in which we're living the words around equality and justice, as opposed to just us telling them that stuff, right? That's just not how it goes. So we have to think super hard. Like, that puts a lot of responsibility on us individually and collectively to live Black Lives Matter, if that makes sense. Okay. The last big concept that usually comes up in my talks, right, is this notion of intentionality. Okay. This notion of like racism, and if we, the topic of this talk is about the structural aspects of racism, right? That means it's a system, and if it's a system, that means it just goes, right? And it's been going since we were, before we were here, and it might keep going after we're gone. And so, but the fact that that it's a system means that even if we sit here and we all have really good intentions, right? Just good intentions, and we all have good feelings, and we just want it to go away, it's not going to stop that way, right? It's going to actually take someone taking like that stick, shoving it into the, the workings of the machinery to make it stop. It's going to take something affirmative, right? And something that you're going to have to go do, rather than, a pretty common sense notion, which is that if we just wait and wait and wait, like, it's just going to get better, right? And we this notion that like things just get better as time goes on. There's something to that, but there's a way in which that makes these systems keep going quite seamlessly. So what does that mean to be intentional? It means we have to seek to consistently elevate the voices and the perspectives of folks who are rendered voiceless. Rather than, a pretty common thing is to say, look, we want to hear from everyone. This is open to everybody, right? Volunteer. It's, no restrictions, right? That's not enough, right? Because the folks who will feel, oppressed are not going to feel like, okay, this is a place for me, right? They're going to feel like, okay, like, I don't know, I've been socialized to, stay quiet, right? And so what ends up happening is the people who have been socialized to speak up, step up. Those who have been socialized to not, stay down. And then you just reproduce a system where the folks who are, have been in power are in power, and the folks who aren't. So what I'm saying is, it's going to take, you have to like intentionally go set, and not wait for the crisis, by the way, not wait for like the crisis to happen, but be consistently seeking out the voices of folks we know, for whatever reasons, because we're all human, don't get their voices and perspectives elevated. And doing that consistently, so that you're forming authentic community with folks and relationships with folks, not just going to them when there is a problem, all right, or waiting for them to come to you when when there is a problem, right? We also, in terms of our Black communities in particular, we need to see those people and our communities through a strengths-based lens, right? Oftentimes when we talk about Black folks, it's, oh, the poor Black folks they've been victimized, and oh, poor them, and we just need to. It's like, no, Black folks, especially in the United States context, are a picture of like strength and resilience. Like, even if you're going to think about the folks who came here by the virtue of of enslavement from Africa, the folks had to survive getting captured in Africa. They had to survive the Middle Passage, and they survived everything after that. These are strong people. And all these things that we love about Black people and that we love about Black culture, right, is in the face of being denied all the opportunities to do that well in the first place. So all the things that we love about Black people are Black people doing things when nothing is lined up for them to do it in the first place. So we are people of strength. So when I urge us to start to think about the history of Black folks and thinking about that, it's not through the lens of poor Black folks. It's through the lens of look at the beautiful things that folks have created in the face of being denied access and denied resources. So it's a strength based. And the last thing I'll say about this is it's going to, it's just going to be, it's going to require, courage. Like, racism keeps going so easily because it's easy to not disrupt it. It's easier to not disrupt it. It's easier to not say something. It's easier to just pretend we didn't hear that. It's easier to look away, right? And so it's going to involve acts of individual and collective courage and acting on principles. And we've talked about this, and I'm sure Sheikh Khalil will bring this up too. We have principles in our deen that give us an affirmative, responsibility to do that anyway, right? As believers. So I want to just give 3 suggestions moving forward, like on a sort of an individual level, a family level, and then like a masjid level, okay? And then I'll gladly pass it off. So on an individual level, in terms of moving forward, I'm urging folks who don't know who don't know enough about the history and the context of Black folks to learn, right? We're something that I know a lot of Black folks these days are kind of tired of are the following: well-intentioned folks like who are trying to learn more, coming to us and going, please, how can I learn more about this, right? It's a good question, and I think it's coming from a good place, but it also, you can understand how it's hard for Black folks who are on the business end of racism, getting asked by other folks to be like, well, how do we stop this, right? It's not really our job as Black folks to stop racism, if that makes sense, okay? But look, so all I have to say is that it can reify racism if like people are just like, well, leaning on Black folks to then teach them how to like stop oppressing them. Okay, so all that to say is that we want you to learn, but and you can definitely ask for help, but make some initial honest attempts to learn yourself moving forward, right? And then move from there, right? And we have mashallah, we have a really smart community, right? And so I know a lot of people just sort of say, well, how would I ever learn it? Like, we have folks in this community who will go on Google or YouTube and learn how to like fix a computer or a crashed website or whatever. Right? So I'm sure we can figure this out. I've given 2 just small resources here. I've given this one before. The 1619 project from the New York Times Magazine is a wonderful resource. It's interactive, even has a podcast, and it does an amazing job of both talking, sort of showing of like the history of the ways that Black folks have been treated and were resilient in the face of that treatment, and drawing some straight lines to how we see how things are, we're experiencing some of the social context that we're experiencing today, okay? Another great book and Zornia Hurston is just a wonderful resource as an author and as an anthropologist. One of her more recent books is called Barracoon, which is an amazing account of her interviewing a man who was at the time remembered his life pre-enslavement, remembered the Middle Passage, remembered being enslaved, and remembered life after enslavement. So it's just a wonderful, what I love about this historical perspective is like that Black people's histories, especially in the United States, don't start at slavery, right? That's another way in which we start a deficit model of looking at Black folks is like, they started as slaves, right? And there's a difference between calling Black people slaves or calling them enslaved, right? Some of that's about language too, right? It's not like the core of our being that we were slaves, is that we were enslaved, right? But so those are just 2 places to start to think about some of the historical perspectives of, where Black folks, how they came to this context and where we are now. I think as a family, what will be really important, this gets to some of the principles I was talking about before, is as families support Black businesses, right? Figure out the restaurants, figure out the different businesses or organizations that are run by Black folks. Again, like this was just me doing a quick Google search, right? This community is smart enough to like, I know there are going to be all these questions. Brother Darren, like, what are these? Like, I'm going to do the same thing you're going to do. I'm going to start Googling. I mean, some of these, yes, I know, but some of this is like doing the work. And so, do some work to go support Black businesses. And that has the impact of both showing your family, right? Like giving your family exposure to folks in a variety of roles and showing them that Black people are business owners and people who, run things, right? Not just the people who clean things up in those places, right? Or cook in those places. And it's a form of economic justice. One of the things I was just saying earlier is that one of the biggest injustices that Black people have faced is that they have not reaped the benefits of all this American economic prosperity that happened on our back. So one small thing we can do is at least start supporting the communities that are out there trying to, do good business. Last thing I'm gonna just, and this is just suggestions for our community. Okay, this is just suggestions for our community moving forward. I ain't nobody. I'm just here to just, make some suggestions. I think we need to create a position or a committee that focuses on intra-faith relations, right? We have, what we do. We have the interfaith, folks, right? And it's important, and and we have to, right? And we roll out the red carpet for our interfaith brothers and sisters, and we do all this amazing stuff, right? And it stands in such stark contrast. If you read some of the comments we saw in the WhatsApp group, it stands in stark contrast to the brothers and sisters who deserve that treatment the most from us, right? Our own brothers and sisters, right? And so it speaks to the notion of us having a dedicated and continuous way to be thinking about how to elevate those voices and perspectives of the different constituencies within our community. Alhamdulillah, I know we have a WhatsApp group that's focused on our convert community. That's like the type of step we're trying to do, to like seek out, figure out what communities are there that have needs and work together with them to cultivate, an authentic relationship. Last thing I'll say is we do lots of fundraisers, right? And of course we have to fundraise for our own masajid and our own programs, of course. But another thing that we really need to be doing is fundraising for causes that impact Black lives, right? And so we need to be known, in the Black Muslim or non-Black Muslim, right? Communities as folks who show up financially or otherwise, right, for these causes. And so when the crises, especially when there isn't a crisis, right? And so when these crises do come, they know, our communities will know that our Muslim brothers and sisters are, genuinely have been and continue to be here for us in substantive ways beyond just, a message from, that says Black Lives Matter. Okay, does that make sense? So I'm hoping that those three types of suggestions will be useful for us individually and collectively moving forward. I'll end it there. Anything that was good for me came from Allah. Anything that was bad for me was from me. So I ask forgiveness for that. And Jazakallah khair for this opportunity. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. MashaAllah. Very interesting points that you brought up, mashallah, for our community. And mashallah, because you know our community very well, and you've always been here and always been very useful to have you speak to us, mashallah. Great points, inshallah. I really like those points, and it's something that we have to think about it and try to implement some of it. And for those who are who just joined us, we're trying to put that interfaith kind of committee together, and perhaps do some other educational programs, like doing a workshop. There were some suggestions that came in. Inshallah, Brother Zaki and others are going to be leading that. So anyone who would like to join in, whoever wants to join into that group and to help out and facilitate, inshallah, you're welcome to join that group, inshallah. Barakallahu fikum. Next up, we have, mashallah, Imam Dr. Khalil Abdur Rashid is the first full-time university Muslim chaplain at Harvard University, instructor of Muslim studies at Harvard Divinity School, and public policy lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He serves all Muslim students at Harvard University, and he was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. I believe, Sheikh Khalil, your father was one of the first Muslim mayors of one of the towns over there. I believe it's Stone Mountain, where the KKK, their second birth, I think, inshallah, hopefully that you could say something about that. Lecture degree in liberal studies and American Islam from Southern Methodist University in Dallas, where he got his doctoral degree. He completed his doctorate in liberal studies in American Islam from Southern Methodist University, and holds both a Master of Arts in Islamic Law and Middle East Studies, as well as a Master of Philosophy in Islamic Law and Middle East Studies from Columbia University in New York, where he also served as a chaplain there. And mashallah, the list goes on. Mashallah, we're really honored to have you on this meeting, and mashallah, we're always blessed to have you in this community, in the Greater Boston community. So, Sheikh Imam Dr. Khalil Abdur Rashid.
الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Jazakallah khair to Imam Abdur and the sharing community. And thank you, Dr. Darren, for that amazing presentation. Brothers and sisters, there's not a lot to be said after the points he mentioned, because it's very, very, very powerful resources. Mashallah, amazing idea about establishing, intra-faith committee and programming. I think that alone. I mean, and doing fundraisers for community, marginalized communities in the United States in Ramadan. I mean, that, Black communities, and then by extension other groups as well. We're good at talking about the plights of others internationally, but not so good at talking about the plights of us of groups domestically. And that is because we still have, not us individually. Don't misunderstand what I'm trying to say, but when I say us, I'm talking in broad strokes, general. We still, as an American Muslim community, we still have jahiliyyah in us, right? Understand the Prophet. That was the Prophet's response, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when Abu Dhar made that comment about Bilal radiallahu ta'ala, and when he said, you're the son of a black woman. And he said, Abu Dhar, we're all the sons of black women, of a black woman, why should that, in other words, why should that be a bad thing? In other words, what's wrong with that? That's not the level that, our teaching tells us to aspire to. And he said, you still have jahiliyyah in you. This is an important factor. We as American Muslims have to understand that we live in a country that offers a tremendous amount of freedom and opportunity, but is riddled with jahiliyyah. And if you are part of this, the fabric of this nation, there are good things that you're exposed to, no doubt about it. But then there are problematic things that you'll intersect with as well. And we have to be very, very important about what we observe. I mean, Dr. Darren mentioned it so very well. Kids, they learn by what they see. So just step back for a second. What kind of optics emerge? I mean, the optics of a black man being killed outside a Muslim-owned grocery store, right? What are the optics of that? In a time where folks have lost their job and folks are hungry and folks have died by the 100,000 on a disease, and unemployment in the tens of millions, in a time where, as a community, we are supposed to know how to take care of our poor. I mean, that's what our Prophet ﷺ was a master at, right? So what does, and I'm not pointing blame, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying anybody was at fault, but I'm talking about the optics, okay? I'm talking about the optics. If we talk about how bad it is to have a Muslim framed as a terrorist on the media, what about the optics of a black man being killed by, outside of a halal meat store when the clerk inside called the police on alleged counterfeit $20 bill, right? During such a time. The optics. And furthermore, that the beauty of institutions like the Sharon Masjid to even have these kind of conversations, when these things are necessary conversations to be had across the board in American masajid. I'm so grateful to you, Imam, and to the community for even hosting such a thing, right? Because there are certain things that we need to wake up to. So jahiliyyah, it's important to understand that while as individual people, there may be Muslims who are not racist individually, as a collective body, we are complicit in racist themes and racist actions as a collective body. And some of us may be infected by prejudices that are born from racist tropes that are produced in the community that we are completely unaware of. And so the narrative of the Black American community, forget Black American Muslim for a second, the narrative of the Black American community is important because it educates the public and by that the Muslims as well, about racism. And as the core element, this is one of the major idols in the Jahiliyyah element of this country here. Okay, and the Quran mentions Allat wal Manat wal Uzza, the main three idols in Mecca at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Quran itself, a book of Tawheed, has the names of the three major idols that people worship. I mean, that's a paradox if you think about it. This is a book of Tawheed that mentions the names of idols, not just one, three. So we have to, if the Quran can talk about the idols of the people of Mecca, we have to talk about racism and other of the 99 isms that are idols as well in our community as well. Not to glorify it, but so that we can deconstruct those idols. We can topple those idols. We can crush those idols. And we have to recognize if parts of those idols are inside of us. Remember the Sahabas early in the time of the Prophet, a few of them, not all of them, of course, we know, but a few of them in the Meccan time were so conditioned to carrying the pocket-sized idols with them, the pocket-sized versions of them. They would tuck them under their arms when they prayed. And they would still make their salat with the pocket-sized idol under their arm. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ told them to raise their hands for the Allahu Akbar. Drop that baggage. Let it go. Doesn't matter that it's pocket-sized. Some of us have pocket-sized prejudices towards Black folks in these communities because of the way that we respond or the lack thereof, the way that we interact or the lack thereof, the way that we say salam or the lack thereof, the way that we do business with them or the lack thereof, the way that we marry and intermingle with them or the lack thereof, right? Those things we have to understand. We have to understand what we carry, the baggage we carry under our arms, proverbially, metaphorically speaking. It's not just about, the Allahu Akbar doesn't solve everything. We have got to drop some things. Now, Jahiliyyah is not a historical concept alone. Jahiliyyah in the Quran has three parts to it, three components to it. One is the thought component. Allah Ta'ala mentions different ayah in the Quran referring to the thought, Jahili mindset. And this is predominantly the way people think about God, the way people have false ideas about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Wrong thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then there's Jahili behavior, Jahili actions, right? I mean, what happened in with George Floyd was Jahili. For that matter, what happened today with the 75-year-old man who's elderly, wasn't even Black, just an elderly man, no respect for our elders, 75-year-old man who was pushed down by the police officer, head bleeding on the concrete. The one officer goes to help him, and his superior, another officer says no, pushes him away, refuses the man help. Where's the respect for elders? What law is written that says a law enforcement officer cannot help an elderly man on the ground? What kind of society do we have here, right? So Jahili actions, Jahili, and then Allah Ta'ala talks about Jahili people, the people who have been conditioned by those Jahili thoughts, bad thoughts about Allah, people that have been conditioned by those Jahili actions towards others, and so they just become Jahili people, right? They're not, Kareem, right? Kareem is the generous person, right? For example, they embody generosity. Okay, they're just Jahil. Allah Ta'ala says, Arid anil Jahilin, right? Turn away from the Jahilin, those who are ignorant, not just somebody who is thought ignorant thoughts, but somebody who embodies ignorance. Not just ignorance, arrogance as well. Arrogance as well. Because what we understand from an Islamic point of view, is that ignorance has two types. There are two types of jahil, ignorance. One is called simple ignorance. And that's a praiseworthy state where somebody really, truly, honestly, genuinely does not know. They don't know. And that's the state of many American Muslims who are in this country who just honestly don't know the history of Black Americans in this country, honestly don't know the struggles of honestly don't know the history of Islam in their own cities, honestly don't know what this whole struggle and everything has to do with the formation of systems and institutions, the way people think, don't have a clue. They really don't know. They came to this country, they live in this country, they have families, they marry, but they really haven't had the opportunity to learn because maybe they've been struggling to survive in this country, perhaps, right? They don't know. That's not a blameworthy predicament to be in and of itself. But it is blameworthy to stay there. It is blameworthy to think that that is where you need to be. That's not right. So the other condition is compound ignorance. It's called jahl murakkab. Compound ignorance is the kind of ignorance that the Quran condemns. And compound ignorance is somebody who doesn't know, but thinks they know, and more importantly, think they know better. So they become arrogant to the plight of others, indifferent to the plight of others, don't care about the plight of others, not your business, the plight of others. Lakum dinukum waliya din in one sense, not in the religious sense, but in the sense that I don't care about you, I'm not concerned, and I know your plight better than you. I want to hear about your story, your narrative. That is compound ignorance. They think they know. That's why Dr. Darren's advice is very important. Start the process of ilm, of education. Understanding your surroundings is part of your belief system as a believer. That's why Allah Ta'ala talks about the ayat around you, around all of us. And he says, Sanurihim ayatina fil afaq wa fil anfusihim. I'll show you the signs of me in the horizons and in your own selves, hatta yatabayyana annahu al-haq, so that you know this thing is true. We are being put to the test as a community, as a larger American community, but nobody has any real solutions because they don't get the term jahili. People talking about racism, but as Muslims, we know jahili. We know jahiliyyah very well. And our tradition from the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ tells us something interesting. It tells us that Islam and the Muslim is not just away from jahiliyyah, but in reality is anti-jahiliyyah. We are not supposed to be like, oh, that's racism, that's jahili, so I'm not like that. No, that's not good enough. What is good enough is not only am I not like that, but you're not supposed to be like that. That's wrong. I'm going to speak out against that. I'm going to march against that. I'm going to legislate against that. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to make sure that's not a part of my community. Amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. Speaking out against what's right, standing up for protesting what's wrong. That's why the Prophet said, when you see a wrong, what did he say? Just don't do it yourself? That's not what he said. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, when you see a wrong, what did he say? Just feel bad about it? No. He said, Sallallahu alaihi wasallam, change it. The idea of change means you got to be active. And not only active, proactive. And not only proactive, anti against that thing. Otherwise, the discussion on change is useless. Why would the Prophet Sallallahu alaihi wasallam start with active change, not passive? Change it with your hands. Go out and do something about it. And if you can't do that, change it with your tongues. Second level of change. That's anti-jahiliyyah. And if you can't do any of that, dislike it in your heart. Make sure that you aren't changed as a result of your inability to effectuate change. That's anti-jahiliyyah. وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. That's the lowest of the lowest of the last level of iman. Because if that's the point where inside of you, you become complacent to your surrounding, you become complacent to the suffering, you become indifferent to the plight of other folks around you, you don't care about that, you're just going to do your own business and go your own way and do your own thing. What kind of believer are you? What is the purpose of your existence? Why should Allah Ta'ala have given a book to everybody? Why couldn't he have just given you a book to guide yourself and you go on your own? This is a communal thing. And therefore, brothers and sisters, jahiliyyah, when we see that we have jahiliyyah, and by the way, there's no such thing as jahiliyyah in a person, right? Jahiliyyah is a system, all right? It's systemic. It's systemic. It was systemic in the Quraysh. It was systemic in Fir'aun's house, right? That's what Haman was representative of. Right, Haman was the administrator of a Jahili system. All right, and that system, what did it do? It slaughtered men in the streets. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Right, and intimidated mothers. Sounds familiar, right? And so this Jahili system is part of the discourse of the Quran, and therefore the Ummah of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we have to be attuned to the Jahili system that is present and existing in us in our climate today. We should be joyed at this, because this allows us an opportunity to walk in the path of the Anbiya, to walk in the path of Musa, to walk in the path of Harun, to walk in the path of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam alayhi wassalatu wassalam. But we've got to act. So what are the steps to acting now? One, education. Well, you can't act if you don't know. You can't act if you don't understand. Let's be an educated community. Education is a process. It's ongoing. It's it's diverse. We got to start learning about these things. Don't read, listen to podcasts and discussions. The film Just Mercy is out now for free. I highly recommend every single American Muslim who has no idea about and who has an idea. Okay, not that we need reminders, but that's a good halal a film, a clean film that is based on a true story, that is an accurate representation of sort of the historical precedents of the contemporary problems that we have today. We could have a film screening virtually on that and have a discussion on that. Every masjid should have something like that. We have to have discussions, and then we have to talk about the Black American Muslim community as well. Because to understand the Black American, what happened between Malcolm X's Umrah and the death of Muhammad Ali in 2006? What happened? What happened with how was Islam established not in the suburbs? Because that was the tremendous and amazing job of immigrant Muslim communities who came to this country, worked hard. Their parents came to this country and worked hard, and they went to the suburbs and they established Islam in the rural areas of America that had not been established. But what we have to understand was that Islam was first established in the urban areas, in the urban centers. And that's important because what occurs also in the urban areas is aggressive policing, serious poverty, okay? City action that has to do with the way people are actually treated when they come in direct contact with the lack of funding, problem housing, disabled folks, abandoning of the elderly, rampant poverty. How did the American Muslims deal with this before there was cable news, right? When things were done purely because we were trying to spread this deen, that history has to be known, told, spread. It's a very proud history. It's a very honorable history. Because we lost our way in 1997, 98, 99, and 2000 and 2001. Everything was shifted as a result of the war on terror. The optics shifted, the focus shifted, the projects shifted, the narrative shifted, everything shifted. So our Qibla as a community, I mean Qibla in the metaphorical sense, right? Our direction that we were headed in, we were building up urban, poor America. That direction changed in the late 90s. That's not a bad thing, but that's a reality. So we have to understand our local history, because in order to fix this systemic racism and to deal with the Jahili system, we're going to have to go back to the urban communities and continue the fight that was done, that was started, that was interrupted, okay? So one of the most beautiful lessons I learned from my late father, rahimahullah, who Jazakallah khair, Imam Abdur Rahman, for invoking him because he was my first hero. And he was greatly, my father was a student at Jamiat Medina in the early 80s, one of the first African Americans to go to the University of Medina, but he left early because of racism, because he was always called a boy. In Jamiat Medina, they used to call him, Ya Walad Ta'al, come here, boy. And he said, he gave up. He said, I did not come to Islam to come to the city of the Prophet to be called a boy, the same way I was called a boy in Louisiana, because he grew up with the Klan. So he left. He didn't even finish his studies. He couldn't take it, right? He couldn't take the racism in the community, and he chose to combat that, but in the American context. And he became the mayor of the city that birthed the second coming of the Klan. And he worked on the hatred in that community by building up family and by diversifying the community and working with and against law enforcement. You can change communities when you do those things, but you gotta tackle the Jahili elements that are around you. We can't change the Jahiliyyah in the world. We got to change it here, brothers and sisters. So I want to just close by just saying two things, inshallah ta'ala. One, the optics, we don't do things for optics, okay? But the optics of George Floyd's situation should be a call to action for all of us, right? We cannot be complicit in the things that go on in our neighborhoods and where we live and where we work and just go about business as usual. We have a stake in the justice and the injustice that happens here. That's what it means to be a part of this community. And we have a solution. So the first solution is we got to, as communities, work with City Hall, work with communal faith leaders, and work hard as a Muslim community in every city, from every mosque, in every town, county level, to establish communal centers that interact with government officials, with law enforcement, to add a strong layer of communal accountability, oversight, and review over what happens in our neighborhoods and in our streets and in front of our businesses and in our homes. There should be consequences regarding funding. Certain institutions don't get funded if police officers run rampant in our streets. If there's racist incidents that are allowed to, racist symbols, Jahili symbols that are allowed in our communities, we should protest that. We'll protest that by speaking out against it, forming unions, forming an alliance of virtue, a hilful fudul, partnerships, strategic partnerships with other folks that think like us, faith leaders that think like us, advocates that think like us, to help put pressure on city leaders that are elected officials to do the right thing in our neighborhoods. And finally, we have to continue these conversations in our masjids so that we can never become content with mediocrity, right? Because gradualism, passivism is the best tool of shaitan. Once shaitan say you're good, that's when shaitan that's when we have that feeling that we've arrived, that we're good. That's when shaitan has triumphed, and that's why we have to persist. And this job will never end until one of two things: Nasr or Maut, right? Victory or death. That's it. Either we're successful or we return to Allah Ta'ala. Both is great for the believer. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
إحدى الحسنيين. So inshallah, we'll open up for Q&A. For those who want to ask verbally, you can raise your hand. Inshallah, Brother Imran Dam, who's the admin, he will unmute you and you can ask your question. If anybody would like to ask a question, and they can post it here in the chat box. So that's open for your questions, inshallah. I would like to also kind of draw attention that please ask questions that are related to this subject. We know that there's a lot of struggling around the world, and we talk about Palestine and Syria and all those things, and there are genuinely very important subjects, and we talk about it often. But this is we want to focus on the African American community. So anything related to this subject, inshallah, you can go ahead and ask those questions. Barakallahu feekum. Let me see if we have someone here.
It looks like I see some people are raising their hand. I see Brother Zaki first, and then Sister Vila, and then Sister Vila.
Quiet. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Darren.
Walaikum salam.
Dr. Khalil, jazakumullah khair.
Salam.
This is very timely. I want to ask you how we can maintain a relationship with police departments. As you know, masajids have certain relationship they maintain with police department, but at the same time, making sure we are present to speak and support justice and policing reform prison reform.
Yeah, Brother Darren, did you want to speak to that?
No,
or-
please, you can go, please. Yeah, please.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Zaki. Very good question. I can say two things quickly. I have some experience in this area, alhamdulillah. One, every single masjid in every single city needs to have a strong relationship with their local police department. And what you need to do is contact the what's called the office of every police department in every city has an office of what's community affairs or community relations or something of that nature. That's the first step. That's not the goal. Okay, that's entry into the front gate. Okay, well, your ultimate goal should be, this happens through the communal relations door though, right? So first you want to find out who the chief of community relations is or who the director is, invite them to the masjid, have a talk, sit down, talk with them, and then you need to tell them, this is what we like to, we have, 5 masjids in our city, we have 10 masjids in our city, we have 3 masjids in our city. We'd like to establish a citizens commission that will comprise, 2, 3, 7, 11 members from our community to have meetings with the chief of police of the city or with the commissioner, the police commissioner of the city on some kind of basis to talk about building relationship with the community and to support communal policing. What you want is a council of folks to meet with the chief of police or the police commissioner if it's in a large city on a regular basis. Now, here's the problem. You got to get the right people to sit at the table. You can't get people that I've been in, I can tell you an example of something that happened very similarly where a few people at the table wanted seats at the table so they could have access to, like, they could make personal requests, free parking spaces, a Jummah, so their community members wouldn't get ticketed. That's not the right way to do things, right? You're not there for personal gain. You are there sitting at a table speaking to power. And you have to understand that when you got to have the right kind of people there, and it's best to have people who have experience sitting at such tables, so that effort will be the community at large will receive the benefit. So ultimately, the goal is to establish a council from the community to sit with the chief or the commissioner. Every city works different. To be able to advocate to the community, to go to be a voice for the community to the head of the police. Same thing needs to happen with the city at the city level with the mayor's office and things of that nature. That does happen in some cities, but those examples are few and far between. I was a part of the first one in the city of New York that met with the NYPD, for example, and we met with the police commissioner and the chief of police all at the same table on a bi-monthly basis, so every other month. And that was when we had the stop and frisk situation and the New York's and the spying on the Muslim community in New York. And so though that model worked, I was there. I was the first one, part of the first cohort. Today, you don't have spying on Muslim communities in New York City. Today, you don't have stop and frisk. That community stuff, that community work paved the way and built the foundation for the destruction of those policies. But that kind of model has to work around the country in local cities, but you got to have a diverse group of folks sitting around the table because they have to command respect when they're sitting with power. If you have a bunch of people there who are afraid of law enforcement, who don't know how to talk properly to people who are there because they're afraid of them or because they want personal gains, then it's a waste of time and it's not going to work. So, and you have to understand that this is a long-term game. You're not going to get any major change in a month or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. You're laying a foundation. It's like Hudaybiyah in the Prophet's time. So I said them, you're gonna work hard. You'll be patient, be a little setback, but long term, you're gonna see, inshallah, the conquest of Mecca. And that's the way everybody at the table has to think. And folks at the table have to meet outside to understand what their agenda is, what the strategy is. It's a major project. You just can't go into a room with major local officials and not have a plan, not have a strategy. So this is something that takes thought, professionalism, strategy, a diverse group of folks, and it's very serious because oftentimes when you're dealing in situations like this, you have one chance to make it happen. And if you squander that chance, many times they won't meet with you again, or they'll keep meeting with you because they know you're stupid and they can play you, right? They know that you just, they can read through you real quick, especially when you're dealing with law enforcement. They can read people very good. So if your intentions are not sincere, you don't know what you're doing, you're not the right person at that table. We got to have the right people speaking on behalf of our community. And so just because a person wants to do it does not mean they're qualified and they should do it. Like the Prophet ﷺ told one of his sahabas that wanted to represent them in a meeting, he said, the Prophet ﷺ told him, you're too kind. Your heart is too soft. In other words, you're good, but this is not the right work for you, right? Your place is elsewhere. So this is the kind of thing that we need to do, inshallah ta'ala.
The only thing I would add to that, that amazing advice would be that to the extent that, we do a lot of focus on elections, especially national or presidential elections, to the extent that you have folks like district attorneys or sheriffs or whatever, some of these positions are voted upon, right, by the people. And so it makes a lot of sense to be involved one way or another in thinking about who we're voting for or in those campaigns, so that we can make sure that the people, we can also have the people we want on the other side of the table from us as well. I had the pleasure of sitting in on a meeting with the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, who was had a meeting with Rachel Rollins, who's the DA in Boston, and I think that was a function of a lot of the community organizing and electoral organizing that folks of color did to get Rachel Rollins elected in the first place, who would then be a person who would be a willing participant to sit across from us in that meeting.
Next is Sister Villa. And then we have a few online questions.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much for your speeches. I was wondering if you could suggest, do you know of any masajid in the US which have been successful and have really made a difference in transforming their communities to a point where Black Muslims felt just as much at home as other communities tend to feel without so much difficulty, so that we could maybe get in touch with them and learn from their best practices and see what we could learn?
Sheikh Khalil, do you want to jump in on that one? I'll just say quickly. This is not my total area expertise, but a person that comes to mind when I think about African American Muslims who came in and transformed communities, it would be Imam Zaid Shakir, right? Who I think in a few different places in New Haven. New Haven is a community that I know about for sure, and other places where he did a lot of intentional work. To both, find a place for, a masjid, right, in the community, and then simultaneously doing the work, right, to create the conditions for that masjid, and therefore the Muslim community to thrive. And what that really involved, from my understanding, is a lot of work with, folks from the community, whether it was folks who were doing good things in the community, folks who might not be doing good things in the community, doing detrimental things to the community, a lot of outreach and coordination to essentially, I don't like the term cleaning up communities, but sort of, creating a community foundation so that masjid and the subsequent Muslim community around it could thrive. But that's just one example that comes to my mind.
Yeah, I would have to say that's absolutely, spot on. Jazakallah khair. I think to mention from the other perspective, in my experience, whether it's in Texas, and Georgia, New York, Jersey, Massachusetts, for that matter, I think it's a work in progress. I think the challenge has been the fact that it hasn't been a priority, and that as an institution, the concessions have been allowances for less, for poorer masjids to have a spot in Ramadan for fundraising. And if there are communal activities, I know one or two cases where there are larger, wealthier suburban masjids that partner once a year with an inner city mosque to do, a food drive or clothing drive or something of that nature. But so those relationships are largely looked at as important because the suburban masjid can have sort of access to the inner city through that inner city mosque, right? Instead of going there themselves, they can sort of, go through there and that becomes the value of the relationship. That has to change. So we are work in progress, but I think I don't say that to be critical as much as I say that to say that, that the conditions on the ground have not been one that have been open to the idea that there needs to be a really good discussion about the intrinsic value and the importance of the presence of inner city Muslims, right? And because the value has been on finance and money so much. One of the paradoxes of a mega mosque is that yes, it's big and beautiful, but it's really expensive, and it sucks in all of the resources so that there's nothing left to give outside, right? Donors are fatigued, and it sucks in everything to its own center. So it's hard to have a school. It's hard to have a clinic. It's hard to have a seminary. It's hard to have a hospital. It's hard to have so many other necessary integral functions that you need in a community to establish a real community. And so folks are caught into the idea that the community is a center. Community is not a center. Community is people. People coming together to solve people problems in real humane ways. And so that's the value for sure that the Black American Muslim community emphasize, and that's part of the success from definitely from mid 60s to the mid 90s for 30 almost 40 years, and then with the rise of suburban wealthy mega mosques, the Qibla shifted. The Qibla shifted because the alliances shifted. And so if you've got a suburban mega mosque, you build an alliance with a suburban mega church, and you build an alliance with a suburban mega synagogue. And so your communities are all based in wealth and the production of wealth and the accumulation of wealth. And the concern becomes a suburban middle class concern. And that is a different kind of thinking, and it's a different kind of concern than the concern of the inner city. It's a different dynamic in the inner city because people's needs are different. People's plights are more dire. People's access and their encounters, with injustice is very different. So there's a different urgency in the inner city and the working communities, and particularly in the Black communities, than there are in the urban centers where there's a lot more comfort and stuff. And so the relationship has been, a different kind of relationship, but I think now is the time to put value into the Black American Muslim community and the Black American community so that we can now reform and enhance all of our masajids, but in different ways, right? In different ways, because there's wealth in the Black community, but it looks different. Mm-hmm. Okay. There's wealth in the Black American Muslim community, but it looks different. We have been conditioned to think that wealth is all green, that wealth looks like sheetrock, brand new carpet, air conditioning. That's the way we've been conditioned to see new clothes, right? That's the way we're conditioned to see wealth. But the early Muslims understood Allah showed them a different kind of wealth. The path of the Prophet ﷺ helps us to understand that the gifts of Allah Ta'ala is that he distributes and diversifies his wealth in different ways amongst different people. So if we don't come to know each other, we won't come to be introduced to a different understanding of wealth. And therefore, if we don't see that, how can we value that kind of wealth? And therefore, our relationship with people is just materialistic. It's not based on actual value. It's based on what we can get from somebody. And that's how institutions have been functioning for 25 years in this country, in the American Muslim community, So that has to change.
That's really a great point. But also from another perspective, there's a question here online. Assalamu alaikum. Is there a possibility for a Muslim community to have a networking system that is not ethnically oriented? Most folks in the Black community are in poverty, not because they are uneducated, but because they don't have support to move forward and get good jobs.
So I'm still trying to get the question. What was the question in there though?
So how is there a possibility for a Muslim community to have a networking system that?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a good, I think that's a good idea in principle, right? Thinking about what are the, the different kinds of privileges and accesses that we have across our community, right, writ large, and thinking about how to make them more accessible to folks who don't, right? So some of us who have access to capital, how do we make that accessible to other folks? Those who have access to relationships with people in power or communities, like how do we make that accessible right across the board? So what I hear in the question, and I think it speaks to what I was saying before, it does require some intentionality, right, in thinking about both understanding the types of wealth that are that different communities, to shake because point, that different communities have different kinds of wealth, right? So to be able to see that wealth exists there, and then going out of our ways to curate opportunities for us to come together, right? And so one way or another, whether that's virtually or otherwise. But I think what I hear is that it requires us to be able to have the foresight to figure out where our different kinds of assets are lying across our communities, and then doing some real work, right, to leverage those for each other, right, and making sure that they're not being concentrated in specific parts of our community, right? So like another way that I could see that happening, for example, is I know that there's a lot of us like in art in the Sharon community who know very well one way or another how to navigate the college application process, right? That I know for a fact for, like some of our brothers and sisters in the Somali community or other folks in Boston, right, may not have that level of, they're definitely doing well in school, but it would be great to be able to know, like, what does it mean to apply for colleges for financial aid and this and that? How do I best position myself, right? And so that's another type of way in which we have some kind of capital in our community that we could be sharing with other folks in our community. That's just another type of way. And I'm sure there's 17 other ways we could be, utilizing that same kind of principle.
MashaAllah, Jazakallah khair. There's two more questions that we would like to go to, and we'll close. One is about what are the books that you will both suggest. Inshallah, we'll come to that later. But there's one question that I want to address and to maybe put that to Sheikh Khalil, because that was something that he mentioned very powerfully, where to go back and to see where that wealth is and to work with the urban communities. So the question is, that when you say go back to the urban masjids, does that mean for just alliances with them?
No, more than that. No. I mean, we have to, in some ways, our relationships with our mosque have been similar to our relationships with countries, in the sense of nationalized, this is my mosque. And with that comes a degree of alienation, right? That as if another mosque is not your mosque. Mm-hmm. I mean, actively you may not think another mosque is not your mosque, but the point is you may not feel at home or comfortable in a mosque in the inner city. Why is that why is that, right? In the same way, somebody from the inner city might not feel at home or comfortable at a mega mosque, for example, right? That should not be the case. That's what I'm trying to get at. So, our relationship, whether it's any inner city mosque, suburban mosque, mega mosque, tiny corner store mosque, masjid, they're all houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They all look different. They have different values to them. They all command respect and dignity. So do the people that inhabit those places and take care of those places. What oftentimes tends to be the case is that we instrumentalize our relationships, right? So, we only, we build relationships with mosques when it's strategically in the interest of the masjid to build a relationship with the mosque or to partner up with it, and we may ostracize a masjid too, you know, if things don't go our way. The houses of Allah cannot be politicized, right? This is really, really, really important. We tend to be political people, and by political, I don't mean every Muslim trying to run for office. I mean a power struggle, right? Control. Everybody who runs a masjid wants control. So that paradigm has to change, okay? And so when we think about relationships between, you know, when I talk about going back to the inner city or going back for wherever, what I'm referring to is going back to people that populate the place. There has been neglect of people in different communities and different neighborhoods, even for people who frequent from people who live in a neighborhood to their local mosque, right? Even a local mosque can quite easily alienate the members of their community, right? Because they may want to cater to a different aspect of their community. Do you remember Abasa wa Tawalla, right? The Prophet flying, you know, the chapter on the Prophet when the Prophet was talking to Walid ibn Mughira, right? Because he knew if he could get Walid, who was the head of the Bani Makhzum clan, the only clan that was a real rival to the Prophet. I mean, if he could get Walid in there, that would be it, right? And Abdullah bin Maktoum said, Ya Rasulullah, I want to hear a little of the Quran, right? Just a little, abasa, right? The Prophet frowned. You never know where Allah will put the barakah in, right? Just like on your plate, the Prophet said, if you leave a grain of rice untouched, that barakah might be there. That person you alienate, that person you isolate, that person you marginalize, could be a man, could be a woman, could be a new convert, could be somebody curious about Islam. That person who you've turned away, who you've not let in, who you've shut your doors to, either actively or even passively, that could be a loss of barakah, which is why the masjid experiences financial problems, which is why the masjid has a dysfunctional board, which is why the masjid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All because you don't take care of the people around you. So we have to go back to find out where have we been neglectful of Allah's blessings, okay? That requires building real relationships of trust with people who are part of our own community, but understanding that as part of our community is not just people who come to the masjid, but it's also people who don't come to the masjid, who may not feel comfortable, or they can't afford to come to the masjid. They like to come, but they can't afford to. Or they would like to come, but they want to see that they have some representation there so that it helps them feel comfortable to come. For example, right? They say the board or the people are made up of one group of folks. They don't see anybody like them, so they don't feel comfortable because that's the way they are. Their constitution is. So we have to be embracing of everybody. And until that's the case, now there's one other thing, if I may, is specifically about the inner city. And please understand my point well here. I'm not telling everybody to just quit their jobs, go into the inner city, okay? What I'm saying is that there's a barakah there that as a Muslim community we've neglected. And that is a deviation from the prophetic teaching, right? Abghuni bidu'afaikum, the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you want to find me, you find me with the people that have been forgotten. That's the inner city. Those are the impoverished folks that have been neglected. Those are the people like George Floyd, right? And the people like Breonna Taylor, right? Not that everybody who's poor is broken, but certainly Black folks are marginalized, right? Systematically, from a system, that's the case, and there's tons of data and facts to support that. So the Prophet said, if you want to find me with those that are marginalized and weak, they're not weak in themselves. They don't have power because the system weakens them, right? That's the point. So as a Muslim community, the Prophet said, find me there. But we have actively run to power. We have actively run away from there. And we are claiming to be his ummah. So when I say we gotta go back, we need to go back to find the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And then he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, فَإِنَّمَا تُنْصَرُونَ and وَتُرْزَقُونَ, because you'll be tunsarun, you'll be nusra, you'll be given victory on account of your proximity to those that are weakened and disenfranchised. He said, Tum sarun, there'll be nusra. You'll be given victory. Right now, we've, as a community, we are not even in third place, right, in terms of exemplars for the American community to even consider Islam, right? So he says, you'll be victorious in your endeavor. And then he said, waturzakun, right? You'll be given rizq. You won't have to fundraising. Since when does the deen of Allah need fundraisers? What, right? When are the masjids, are we so broke we can't hire imams and keep imams? It's because we're not doing things right, right? Turzakun, you'll be provided for, right? You'll be provided for when you do this. So because we run away from people that look poor, act poor, people who we think are weak, people who think we're lower than us, or think dirtier, it's because of our prejudicial jahiliyyah inside of us, right? It's because of our jahiliyyah, right? We think they're dirty, we don't want to get dirty. We think they're criminals, so we don't want to be victimized. So we close our wallets a little bit, you know, when the brother comes in, the sisters go, no, we can't be like that. We can't. And then be reading Quran and Ramadan and acting like we're pious. We can't do this. It's hypocrisy. So we have to go where the barakah is. That's why Malcolm said the most fertile ground for Islam in this country is the inner city and the Black community. And you'll find that the entire Black community in the US has communally converted to Islam, right? Not every Black person is Muslim, but as a community, Black people have accepted Islam as a way. That's why there's so many Khadijas who are non-Muslim. That's why there's so many Latifas and Aishas and Jamals, you know, who are non-Muslim. Their parents give them Muslim names. That's why there's so many hip hop artists that were Muslim, because Islam has been part of the Black experience. Why? Because in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, the only thing that spoke to the needs of Black people and their rights in this country were the Muslims. That's it, right? But when we became suburbanized and we became sanitized, you know, and deodorized and Santa Clausified, and we started hanging up Christmas trees like suburban as Muslims and talking about, you know, Muslim Halloween and everything of that nature, you know, when we became like this, well, of course, we become distant from the sunnah of the Prophet. We lost our roots. We lost our teaching, right? So we turn to the Walid ibn Mughiras, right? And we forget the barakah of the blind man who became the most precious treasure to the Prophet, right? Abu Bakr recognized the barakah of Bilal, right? And later the Prophet was introduced to his barakah when he said, I saw your footsteps ahead of me in Jannah. It's not because he was Black, right? Blackness don't mean you're better than anybody else. But there's a barakah that Allah puts in disenfranchised, weak persons that he allows you to see when you humble yourself to help them, and then they uplift you as a result. When you work on people that have been victimized in the system, Allah works you up. When you lift them up, Allah lifts you up. So that's the system of our deen, right? We got to elevate those that have been stepped on, and then they'll accept this deen, and then the malaika will help in the way that the angels came to the Muslims help at Badr. Numbers won't mean anything. Tanks won't mean it. Not that we want anything, right? Numbers won't mean anything. Allah Ta'ala will open up doors, right? We can barely get Muslims to open up doors for us now. Allah will open up doors for us, but we got to go to where the barakah is. That's the point.
We have Tawqir. Do you want to, I see your question, but you want to go ahead?
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Khalil and Darren. Jazakumullah khair for the wonderful presentation. You kind of answered this in your last response, Sheikh, and Darren, specifically your point of view as well as a community member for years. Do you have any specific guidances or recommendations for the board or administration of a suburban masjid to facilitate ending racism within the community and at large? I mean, as Sheikh mentioned, Sheikh Abdur, we are putting together a team and a commission for anti-racism programming, but is there anything else more specific that you'd advise or recommend?
I'll just say, I think the advice that we got from the Sheikh is spot on. I don't think I have much to add to it. But what I will say is that the likelihood of these type of projects being successful is increased when the leadership makes it a priority, makes it a continuous priority, and holds the community accountable for achieving the goal. So that's just a fancy way of saying, like, when leadership is, you know, in place and is making this happen, the work can get done more efficiently. When it's not, it's like it can still be done, and and there's lots of examples of work, you know, bubbling up from the ground up or the grassroots level up. But yeah, I think the board needs to when the board sets it as like a priority, a consistent priority, and is holding our community accountable for this stuff, that will make it way more likely to be a continuous success. And so what that also speaks to, and I know this is hard, is thinking, and I know we've been one of the things I definitely have seen progress in this regard in our community, is thinking about who is actually on the board and who are we, encouraging to join the board. And I mean encouraging, right? I know sometimes it's a process where we think, look, we just open it up to whoever and let the chips fall where they may. And what I was saying before is that often produces a scenario where we just reproduce the power dynamics, because the people who feel empowered to do that step up and the people who don't. And so it also requires some strategic thought around, thinking about different constituencies within our community, by race, by gender, by immigration status, by language proficiency, by, a bunch of different things, right? And thinking about trying to constitute a board that that represents the interests of as many, constituencies in our community. And so that requires the board being, really intentional and strategic as we move into new cycles for, doing board elections, to be thinking and to be recruiting, and going out of their way to inviting folks from, more minoritized parts of our communities to be part of this. And I'll say that I feel very comfortable in this community, alhamdulillah, right, on the efforts. I'm not going to name these people because a lot of us know who these people are, and I'm not trying to embarrass them and try and take away from their good deeds. But there are brothers and sisters in our community who go out of their way and, came to me and found me and welcomed me and talked to me and sat with me during those Friday dinners, right? And, asked me, and when it was time for, looking for volunteers for this initiative or that initiative, encouraged me, yes, come on, you have to, right? It was that affirmative work, right, that people did, that people who went out of their way to invite me into this process, right, that made me feel so comfortable in this community. And I think we need more of that writ large in our community, and even more so when it comes to thinking about leadership positions in our community.
Yeah, beautiful point. I think brilliant point. I think that, the board needs to invest today, not financially, but just practically in a diversity officer, on the board, somebody who can help make sure the decisions of the board, the message itself is always inclusive and open. Where there should always be diversity on the board, and then the way the board relates to the community should be based in diverse lenses, and also board members themselves have to be committed to yearly discourses, trainings, seminars, on race theory, on gender theory. I mean, all kinds of things. That all kinds of professional trainings that go on in companies and universities as well, to train and enhance leadership and the quality of leadership that can really move the leadership in a positive direction, and should be responsible for bringing new faces to the community also. If board members also have responsibility to bring new people and faces that don't look like them to the community just for a visit, and then they themselves are responsible to every year to visit one or two different masjids, just to see, meet the community members there, and to sit side by side, eat with them. Those are things that go a long way, inshallah ta'ala.
I really like that last point, where to go out and meet other communities and sit with them and eat with them, mashallah. So we will close, inshallah, with that. There are a few more questions, but inshallah, it's already an hour and a half, but barakallah fikum, you took out your precious time from your family and from your busy work that you do. Both of you, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless both of you. May Allah put barakah in your time and your effort and your energy, and may Allah bless you and your family and your parents and all of those, your mentors and those who taught you and those, subhanAllah, that we are learning from you. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our community and to bless all of our volunteers and helpers. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله. For those who are seeking to volunteer or help, inshallah, you can email to programs@icne.net. There are a few community members who have reached out and they really want to help and participate and collaborate in doing activities regarding this same issue, inshallah. So please email at that address, inshallah. Hopefully that we can reach out and put something together. We're also putting together a workshop, hopefully that will happen. We're not opening up very soon for regular programs, so it will have to be virtual, just like our regular program that we're doing now. So that will be a virtual workshop that we're thinking of doing, inshallah, very soon. Also, one of the things that we thought about is to do khutbas on a regular basis throughout the year. So dedicating few khutbas on the same subject to talk about and to educate, and mashallah, hopefully our leadership can take that leadership and make sure to assure, as Khalil Abdur Rashid said, that is very important for our leadership to kind of ensure that this thing happens. Otherwise, these little initiatives kind of die off on their own. So, barakallah fikum. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our leadership, all of our volunteers and helpers in any way. So, inshallah, we'll close with that. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanallah al-azim, subhanakallah bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Alaikum salam. Assalamu alaikum.